What stops us is the ego. We think 11 push-ups isn't going to get me anywhere. If I just write one sentence every day in my book, I'm not going to have a book. But that's what tends to get in the way. So if you want to build the habit, like what do winners do? Winners do hard things. Winners are consistent. Winners do it whether they feel like it or not. That's the identity we're trying to build.
Oftentimes on this show, we're talking to experts who help people along their journey to becoming high achievers. Other times, we talk to the high achievers themselves and the things that they're doing. Usually, we're talking to both at the same time. And Greg Dinkin is no exception. Greg, who is the guest on my show this time, is a keynote speaker, a coach, a #1 Wall Street Journal bestselling author. He has had a TEDx talk. He's won the World Series of Poker tournament before. So he is no stranger to this idea of being a high achiever. But once we've been a high achiever, oftentimes we find ourselves wanting to help people through this aha moment themselves and see where they're capable of going. And in this episode, that's just what Greg does. He helps us understand how something as basic as a mindset shift can really help us on our journey to becoming more of a high achiever. But there's a catch. It's not just about believing in yourself. There has to be something else on top of that that allows you to see yourself on this journey towards progress. And that's what we dive into. So give it a listen. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts on whether or not you feel that this is what it takes to be a high achiever. We have Greg Dinkin. So excited to have you on board. I really appreciate you coming in. Greg, the list of things that you've accomplished, the high achieving that you have done is phenomenal, but I wanted to touch on some. A #1 Wall Street Journal bestselling author. Love that. World Series of Poker tournament winner, which, there it is right there. A keynote speaker, a coach, just so many phenomenal things that we get to talk about today. But first and foremost, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
I love it. I love it. So on this show, I've mentioned time and time again, and we've talked about it, I have people who come in who are high achievers. They're the ones doing it. They're the ones living it and breathing it. And we learn from them in terms of their habits and their mindset, which we're going to talk about. You even did the TEDx talk on mindset shifting, which we're definitely going to talk about today. And then we have the individuals who come in who are the experts. They've probably done something in regards to the work that they do, but they're really focused on helping other people achieve and to grow. We're fortunate enough. You've lived in both worlds, and I'm excited to touch on that a little bit. But I'd love to jump in and just kind of ask you, what gave you the desire to go from somebody who does something like winning a tournament in the World Series of Poker to being the person that helps other people succeed? What drove you to want to do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Look, growing up, I was very competitive in sports. Believe it or not, I was a pretty good athlete. But I was a teacher first. I mean, going back to 9th grade, I played basketball and I coached basketball. I tutored in high school. I tutored a couple people on the SAT. So my greatest joy has always been seeing the light go off for somebody, having that epiphany. I mean, I remember, junior year of high school, my best friend, looking at the SAT saying, what's the mean of 27, 18, 14, and 12? And he had no idea. And I would say, okay, Brian, you score 27 in a game, 14, 18, and 12. How many points do you average? And just that reframe, like, boom, he got it. And so that's always been my greatest joy.
Yeah, I love that. And being a coach is something that resonates really well with me. One of my first introductions to my students is I'm Coach Woody. It's my third favorite title after husband and father. And I love it to death. And I think you've touched on it. A true coach, if they're sitting there with somebody else and they have the choice of succeeding themselves or helping someone else succeed, they're going to lean into helping somebody else. They love that moment where they get to help somebody else have that aha moment or work through something that's challenging them, and not just giving it to them, but really truly helping them. So I think that's tremendous. What I love about you is you've also lived it. You have been in a place of high achievement and restructuring your mind. You talk in your TEDx about how you were up to 300 pounds and how you've been able to lose that and tremendously take care of your body, but how a lot of this had to start within your mind. So I'd love to get into that conversation just a little bit, Greg, because I think I appreciate it.
So let's start with the people know the Roger Bannister story, right? Where it was a belief that you couldn't run a mile in under 4 minutes. And once, of course, he did, the floodgates opened and it was done, 90 days later and several times that year. So we know that story. I find like with that story, what I'm trying to do with whether it's an individual or corporation is like, how do you actually put that into practice?
Yeah.
So let's just take an organization where the best sales month ever was $86,000. So that's the number. So what I'm saying to the CEO or the owner or the sales manager is, if you can get somebody to 100, that becomes the new normal. That's getting Roger Bannister under 4 minutes. And in that situation, so making this very, very practical. So how do you do that? Well, pick a month with 31 days or pick a month with 24 business days. Don't do February that starts on a Saturday. Have a sales contest. Pick a month that's normally busy to begin with. Pick a month where maybe you didn't close out strong the last month. So put the odds in your favor because maybe that's a little bit artificial. But what we know is the minute one person does 100, that becomes the new benchmark. And so, I think, people that are watching this and, curious people that want to learn and listen to podcasts, they know the Roger Bannister story. They know the power of the mind. They've heard the Henry Ford quote, whether you think you can or you think you can, you're right. But like, how do you put it into action? And I think that's, as a manager, you have to start raising those numbers and those benchmarks, and you need evidence. Mm-hmm. Like, you can't really fake it. Bannister had to, cross that mile mark in under 4 minutes. So let me start with a story. And this was just a real, the universe was really conspiring to help me. So if you think about whether you're a parent or you're a student and you have parents, I think most parents want the best for their kids. Is that generally? Yeah.
That's what I want to find.
Right. And so when the kid says, I want to go be an actor in Hollywood, or I want to be a musician, a lot of parents, again, really, really good intentions. Don't get your hopes up. That's a 1 in a million industry. You're better off getting an engineering degree or becoming an accountant. So there's a lot of messaging out there. So this podcast is for high achievers, right? Recognize that most of the societal forces are pushing you to settle, are pushing you to be mediocre. And again, parents, good-natured parents with good intentions, are often trying to avoid the disappointment.
Sure, play it safe. Yeah.
Maybe their disappointment or your disappointment. So growing up, my dad was an accountant who loved poker. Now, he never actually said it, but I think if he'd really gone after his dream, it would have been to be a professional poker player. Now, my dad would constantly tell stories about how that didn't work. So there was a famous story, MC Hammer, who was big, back in my day, was a really good poker player and played. I think he worked for one of the big auto companies in Detroit, and on his lunch break and after work would win. And then he was so good that he quit his job to play poker, and then he couldn't win anymore. So the message was you hear this, don't quit your day job. Or if you're a musician, you might hear, this guy was doing well, but he quit his day job and now he's broke. People who don't want to see you go after your dream, whether they have good intentions or not, will tell you those stories. Yeah. So in my case, and my dad would always say, poker's a hard way to make an easy living. So you think of all these axioms, right? The best way to go on a cold streak is to quit your day job. Did you hear about, Jimbo quit and he went up to Atlantic City and he's now broke. Mm-hmm. So my mindset was, poker can be fun. Poker can be a hobby, but it's not, there's a limit to it. And if you really put your heart into it, it's going to go poorly.
Yeah.
So with that mindset, and again, I had all this evidence. I interned at the Mirage when I was 19. I was a hotel management major. And I was playing in, the big games back at the Mirage and winning. So I had plenty of evidence to show that I was a winning player and I could do this. But again, because we think about, mindset, it's really what programs are running.
Sure.
So if you hit Control-Alt-Delete, it tells you what programs are running on your computer. It's harder to know what programs, but a lot of those programming, and again, everyone's different, but it might be, don't choose a high-risk profession, or you can't make a living doing something you love, or poker is a hard way to make an easy living. So up until 2006, the most I'd ever won in a poker tournament was $7,000. Not bad, right? Like, won $7,000. Okay.
Sure.
Now, leading up to the World Series of Poker in 2006, I also was a literary agent. So in addition to writing books, I started a business at an agency and helped authors get deals with publishers. And because I wrote for Card Player, which was the industry magazine, I would find clients that way, and I became like the agent for poker players.
Cool.
And again, it really depends on when you were born, but poker wasn't really a mainstream thing. And then in 2003, Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker. It was on ESPN, and now it tipped. It was on ESPN, it became a thing. Mm-hmm. So there was a TV show on Bravo called Celebrity Poker Showdown, and Phil Gordon was the host. And Phil was a friend of mine. So now all of a sudden, poker's mainstream. Simon & Schuster reaches out to him to write a book. He comes to me. I negotiate the deal for him. So it's now, May of 2006, and I'm just doing my job. I'm editing Phil's book for him. And over throughout the book, Phil says in a poker tournament, what happens is as you start moving closer to the money, so where they start paying you out, people tend to get very conservative. So what happens is if they're paying, let's say, 30 places, once there's 40 people left, 35 people left, people tighten up because they want to get into the money. But in that scenario, 30th place might only pay a couple $100 or a couple $1,000. So Phil says over and over, the money is at the top. The money is at the top. The money is at the top. I'm kind of going a long time without a breath. Are you tracking with me, Woody?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So the money is at the top. Now, this is coming from Phil, who I respected, and from Phil, who had success. So again, you can't really brainwash yourself artificially. You need evidence. I mean, cognitive behavioral therapy, you need evidence that supports this. So Phil's going, and this is logical to me, right? Like other people start getting conservative. And Phil's point is, if you get aggressive, then you may go out, but that's okay because the risk reward of staying in and getting the money's at the top, the money's at the top, the money's at the top. Yeah. Massive mind shift.
Yeah.
So I go out to Vegas. Again, the most I'd won in a poker tournament was $7,000. And before I went, I subletted my apartment in New York for $900. The entry fee to this World Series of Poker event was $1,000. So in my mind, it really only cost me $100. That's a mental construct. But again, I don't have to chase anything. It's not like, I got to get my money back. It's basically a free roll anyway.
Yeah.
So there's 788 people in this tournament. It's a 3-day tournament. Now, 10 or 11 years before this, I was a really good 7-card stud high-low player. But at this point, I really hadn't been playing much poker. So relative from a skill point of view, nothing changed. In fact, if anything changed, I'd probably gotten a little bit worse in 10 or 11 years.
Yeah.
So I'm out of practice, but I now have this belief system, the money's at the top. I also have this belief system of like, I'm playing to lose. Like I have nothing to lose. It cost me $100.
Yeah.
So at the end of the first day of 788 people, there's 99 left. And I have the 8th most chips. Now, back then, they would pay the top 10%. So if I just made it to 78th, I'd get like $1,200. So I could say, hey, I cashed in the World Series of Poker event, and I came out with a little profit.
Sure.
But I wasn't thinking about that because, again, I was thinking the money is at the top. The money is at the top. So I don't even know what the payouts were. So we get to 78, we get to 60, we get to 50. I'm not even paying attention. And Phil was absolutely right. Other people are tightening up. They're playing more conservatively, which gives me more opportunities to bluff and play aggressively.
Yeah.
All right. So now, these are like 12 to 14 hour days. We're down to, it's like 2 or 3 in the morning. This is back at the Rio in Las Vegas. There's 9 people left. And talk about people getting nervous. There's also a level of prestige and money with making the final table.
Yeah.
So 8 people are coming back the next day. Nobody wants to go out 9th. Right. And again, I think for the listeners, so much of our behavior is based on like norms. It's based on conventional wisdom. And it's based on like human nature. Like, I don't want to go out.
Yeah.
But what Phil was telling me is resist that nature. When others are playing, Warren Buffett, right? When others are scared, be greedy. When others are greedy, be fearful, something like that.
Sure.
So with 9 people left, because I'm thinking, again, the money is at the top, mind shift, I knock out a guy and we go to the next day and I'm the chip leader. There's 8 people left. Now, 8th place is $17,000. So that's my worst case scenario.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not thinking about 8th place, 7th place, 6th place. Well, now we get down to 7, 6, 5, 4. And this is the part of the story that I'm not that proud about. But when we got down to the final 4, if you had asked me in that moment to rank the 4 players, I would have put myself second. Because there was a guy named Pat Poles who had won 2 World Series of Poker tournaments, solid, never saw him make a mistake, was more experienced. I just thought he was a better player than me.
Sure.
There was another player, Jeff Mattson, who'd won a couple bracelets, but I thought he was a little bit over aggressive. And then the 4th guy was from New York, seemed like an amateur. So in my mind, and this is my one regret, I think delusional is a positive word. For most people, it's pejorative. Like, being delusional is bad.
Yeah.
If I could go back in time, I wish I had been delusional enough to believe I was the best player at the table. But I believed that I was the second best player at the table. And how did this thing play out? I ended up getting second place. And I won $102,572, which the bigger picture of all this is because I had, again, pre-brainwashing, pre-mind shift, dad in my head, hard way to make an easy living. My ceiling was 7,000. New mind shift, the money's at the top. I won 102,572.
Yeah. Yeah. There's so many attributes to that story that I think people should lean into and hone in on, right? Because not all of us are going to sit at a poker table at that stakes, right? But we are all going to be facing a situation where we have to ask ourselves, do I take a risk or do I not? And high achievers often are struggling because they don't know what decision they want to make next, right? What they're betting against is not necessarily money, but time, or a combination of both. Where do I spend my money or my time for my money for my time, things like that. How have you seen, Greg, the translation of those lessons that you learned at the table and how they play a part in other areas of your life or your clients' lives in terms of how do I make decisions? How do I reframe my mindset, right? Well, how have you seen that play out?
Well, what first came to mind for me there is I watched a clip of Jeff Bezos talking about most people in life don't know how to value risk, and most people in life don't take enough risk. So, I think if probably a lot of people, whether it's a student saying, do I be an accountant or an engineer, go after my dream? This question of like, do we have to burn the boats? Do we have to go all in? I think that most people make the mistake because if you play it out for Bezos, right? Like, he went for it. And like, imagine if he failed. I have a feeling he would have found a way to eat. I have a feeling he would have found a way to regroup. So I think we get very binary of like, go after your dream and become a multi-billionaire, or fail miserably and be homeless. And so I think, and I'm not sure if I'm exactly answering your question, but taking a risk and going for it, I think people overestimate what's really at stake. And I can also easily hear people saying, easy for you to say, you don't have 4 kids in private school and a big mortgage. I get that. But I think for the most part, look, what Phil's real lesson there, it was not a rah-rah motivational message. I mean, Phil's a math nerd. I mean, Phil's got a background in computer science. He's an entrepreneur. He was really saying, I'm looking at this from a risk-return perspective, right? If you have a 10% chance to win $5,000, let's say you have a 20% chance to win $5,000. Well, that's the expected value of that is $1,000. But if you can give yourself a 5% chance to win 100,000, the expected value of that is $5,000. So it's by the numbers, it's a better decision. So yeah, I think people will go too far and say, well, what if it doesn't work out? And it may be worth playing that out. What if it didn't work out for Bezos?
Yeah, I do that practice a lot with my clients. I ask them, we kind of play along with these hypothetical situations because usually we're talking about decisions, we're talking about directions, things they want to do with their lives, right? Because they've gotten to a point in their life where they're succeeding in a lot of different places, but they still don't feel like they're quite where they want to be in life and fulfillment. So I ask them, all right, let's play out this situation. What's the worst possible thing, minus death, because that's truly the worst possible thing, right? What's the worst possible thing that can happen? Oh, well, I go in and my boss, tells me that they hate my idea. Nope, that's not worst. What's truly the worst? Oh, okay, well, they say my idea is horrible and they laugh me out of the office. Nope. Right? They say my idea is horrible and they laugh me out of the office and they ridicule me and they tell everybody in the industry that I'm the worst possible joke that's ever walked the earth and I'm never going to get a job in this industry again. And I'm like, okay, we're getting somewhere. Now, what's the probability that that's going to happen? Right? And then we flip the script to the other end of the spectrum and say, what's the best possible? Oh, they lavish me with praise and they offer me their job and I get a $1 million increase, right? Like, okay, and then what's the likelihood of that? Let's start to find ourselves in the middle. And I think that your comment was so poignant about this idea of we take things to the extreme, mostly because the world we live in, we think that we either need to be billionaires by the time that we're 25 or we've already failed. And it's just truly not the case. And your poker example was a really good point to that. Like if I lose at 9th place, I am a loser. That's how your mindset was, or their mindset was for a lot of them, right? If I lose at 9th place, I'm a loser. It's not that I won a lot more than I invested, but I'm a loser. And your mindset shift allowed you to go, no, I'm still a winner. And I'm not going to allow that to hold me back from where I could see myself getting to.
Yeah, and in that situation, I'm really making a decision to go for it based on logic and based on numbers.
Yeah. Your TED Talk, I think, touched on that so great because you told the story of Larry versus Harry and this idea of one believes in action, one believes in beliefs. And like, you can't sit in a cave and meditate till you're a millionaire. And you can't tell yourself you're just a millionaire until you are. And you can't just go out and start collecting $1 here and there and finally get there. It seemed as though your sentiment was it takes both. And you mentioned this idea that the belief part really has to be steeped in experience and in evidence. And you told your story of Tank and making his bed and how that belief turned into the belief I'm a disciplined person. So I'd love to expound on that just a little bit more. This idea, not only does it take belief, but it takes the action, which leads to the evidence. Tell me more.
Exactly. So I actually, my friend Bob Garvey and I started a movement called the Human Success Lab. And Bob especially loves James Clear, Atomic Habits, BJ Fogg. And so when I look at a habit, like to do something small every day, like making your bed, and we can tell the story about Tank in a second, it really, to me, it does 3 things. So one, it shifts momentum. So if you weren't journaling every day and you say, I'm going to start this habit, now you've gone from not doing it to doing it, or walking or whatever that habit is. The second is there's a ripple effect. So, if you go for a walk in the morning and get, it puts you in a better mood, you have more energy, it sets your circadian rhythm. So again, we love hacking, right? One small thing leads to all these great things.
Yeah.
And the third one, and I think the most important, is it changes your identity. So the notion around identity is I am someone who, right? So so if you make your bed every day, I hate doing push-ups, right? But I do 11 push-ups every day. Now, 11, as you can see, it's really not getting me ripped, but the 11 push-ups every day, what is it doing, right? Like, I do things I don't like to do. I delay gratification. I do hard things. I invest in myself. So if I'm walking around with a story, and we have stories, right? I never follow through on things. I'm inconsistent. I'm letting myself down. I think one of the biggest stories is like, I don't keep my promises to myself. So if you want to be the mind shift of I'm someone who, identity, keeps his promises, follows through, stays consistent, does hard things. How are you going to believe that without evidence? So the addition, I'm just going to go into a cave and say, I do hard things. Well, no, you don't. Like, you can't trick your mind that much. And so, I think when we talk about, the daily habits, and James Clear talks about this a lot, and my friend Bob hits this over and over. What stops us is the ego. We think 11 push-ups isn't going to get me anywhere. If I just write one sentence every day in my book, I'm not going to have a book. But that's what tends to get in the way. So if you want to build the habit, like, what do winners do? Winners do hard things. Winners are consistent. Winners do it whether they feel like it or not. That's the identity we're trying to build.
Yeah. It this morning is a perfect example. I tweaked my knee a while back doing jiu-jitsu, and I had a tournament this weekend. So a lot of excuses as to why I haven't been training for an event I'm doing later this year, lowest to highest. A whole nother conversation. But I got back into the training for it by walking this morning with the ruck, right? Because my knee was bothering me, and it's not running, which is what I want to be doing, but I started something, right? I do cold plunge because I'm that guy, whatever, call me a douchebag, I don't care. but I like it, and I think it's effective for a lot of things. And so, but I did not want to do it. I did not want to wake up this morning. I did not want to cold plunge. And so you touched on this idea of momentum. I went out and I did 15 minutes of walking with a 30-pound vest. Right? Not going to change my world, but I did it. I am someone who does it. I cold plunge. I every time I think about cold plunging, I'm like, I don't want to do it. Right? It's not like I get excited about it. And so I told myself, you're going to get in for 1 second. Just get in for 1 second. That's literally, I've done it a lot. Just get in for 1 second. And it turned into 6 minutes because that momentum of just, I have found, and I'd love to hear your take on it, transitions are one of the most challenging things for people. To go from where they are to where they should be or want to be is one of the most, getting out of the shower, getting into the shower, getting into the cold plunge, right? Getting into the exercise. And so reducing that friction, or as you're saying, gaining momentum through those habits is a really powerful way to instill them on top of the identity and those other topics.
Absolutely. And again, we steal a lot from James Clear. But he talks about, similar to you, like, I'm only going to go in for 1 second. The habit is I just have to put my gym shoes on and walk out the door. And then, because you start bargaining with yourself, right? And so if you told yourself I have to get in the cold plunge for 6 minutes, it's overwhelming. Yeah. If I told myself every day I have to write for 3 hours, I'm just setting myself up to fail, because again, I want to build the identity that I keep my word. So this is the logic behind it is the harder the habit, or the longer duration, the less likely I am to keep my word. And so, yeah, you can keep your word by saying, I just need to jump in the cold plunge. I just need to put my running shoes on. I just need, like, for me, it's one song on the guitar. Now that might turn into 30 minutes. That might turn into an hour, but I got to just play one song on the guitar. So, and again, the ego will get in the way, but yes, you're right. If the momentum of the transition is hard, look, I think even for those that do a cold shower, the best thing is to start with a shower hot, because it's easy to get into a hot shower, warm shower. Then at the end, okay, now I'm going to let it go cold, and you've done it. Yeah, it's hard to get in the cold shower.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think this translates a lot to even something like, for me, which is really important, fatherhood, right? It's not, when we teach our kids, hopefully, and this is something we all need to work on, but it's not about the outcome that you're really trying to encourage through them, right? That they're not going to be good on the guitar. They're not going to be great at singing. They're not going to be great at doing gymnastics or writing their numbers or whatever. It's not the outcome that you want them to focus on. It's the process of trying that you really want to encourage, because trying and encouraging that and identifying it is what allows them to say, I'm the type of person that keeps trying, even though I didn't do it well the first time, right? Because everybody sucks at everything the first time they do it. But to identify with that, I think is so vital, to be able to say, this is the type of person I am. And you touched on something, Greg, that I think is important as well, because this is stuff that I think not everybody understands, but there's a nuance to it of this idea of not only do you have to identify, you practice 11 push-ups in a day. I also think there's this piece of labeling or identifying what that means to you, right? Like when you do the 11 push-ups, you also have to call out that doing this 11 push-ups means this, right? It means that I'm the type of person that does hard things. It means that I'm the type of person. Have you found that also identifying or reflecting on what it means to you or what it means to your identity is an important part of the process?
For sure. And this gets into BJ Fogg territory with Tiny Habits, where he says you need to celebrate. I don't do that. My friend Ulrich, who got trained in Tiny Habits, he does it and it really works for him. But I want to go back to the kids.
Yeah.
And so, the notion of, I remember my high school football coach saying, once you quit something once, it becomes easier to quit again. We had a rule we couldn't drink alcohol during the season. And I remember him saying, I don't care if it's a sip of beer or you drink a case. It's once you do that one thing, it becomes easier again. So, with the kids, and part of what Bob and I do with Human Success Lab is we create challenges. If the kid's begging to get a dog, or the kid's begging for piano lessons or guitar lessons or to join the soccer team, I think there has to be an agreement with a finite time. Okay, we're gonna sign you up for 6 weeks of piano lessons. You have to complete these 6 lessons. You have to agree to practice 10 minutes a day for 6 weeks. I think, there's a lot of questions about how long it takes to make or break a habit. I think if you say you want to play piano, you got to practice every day the rest of your life, that's too much. But especially because when kids want something, they'll bargain, right? So it's like, all right, you want the piano lessons? Great. We're signing up for 6 weeks. We're prepaying the teacher. That's how it works. And your commitment is to do this. Mm-hmm. And then, you could even say, and if you don't, there's going to be a consequence. Like maybe you have to pay for it, out of your allowance. So I do think for these goals, making them small and having a finite time also sets you up to win.
Some valuable insights from Greg. This idea that not only does it take the belief in yourself and the action, but that belief and that action have to coincide, right? That action brings evidence, that evidence leads into belief, and those two things can come together to help you identify with being the person that you want to be. Phenomenal. So the next episode that we're going to be launching is Greg, who's coming back to help us better understand some of the other nuances about what it takes to have a mindset shift and the limiting beliefs that can prevent us from getting where we want to be. And there's this secondary piece, this last piece of what is his work through the Human Success Lab doing to fight off that is preventing us from truly living the fulfilling life that we want. So, be sure to subscribe to this podcast, Next Better Podcast. Check out nextbetter.com for the work that we're doing through all of this. Make sure you're giving a look at our new journal, the Next Better Journal, which you can find on Amazon.com or on the website, nextbetter.com. Wherever you need to get to the work that we're doing for helping high achievers live fulfilling lives and do meaningful work, be sure to subscribe.